Okay, so for this video, we're going to focus on solving inequalities. These are just like solving equations, except you're solving absolute value equations. I didn't say that right. Not inequalities, but solving absolute value equations. So these are the same as solving equations, except you would be dealing with the absolute value sign. So let me switch screens. Okay, so absolute value basically means whatever is inside the absolute value it becomes positive. Doesn't matter what it is, right? So if, say you have the absolute value of -9, that's equal to 9. Let's say you have the absolute value of -100. That's 100, right? Doesn't matter what it is. So when you're doing these absolute value equations, and this is where a lot of students mess up, you're supposed to set them up without the absolute value signs, and then set up your second equation, but equal it to a negative. The reason why you do this is because what's in here, you can get a negative answer. But when you remove the absolute value, it becomes positive. So this gets you x equals 3 and x equals -3. Because if you were to plug in a -3, you would get -9. But since it's the absolute value of -9, that's equal to 9. When you plug in a +3, you get 9, which is also still just the absolute value of 9. So the same thing goes for number 2. You would get 3 and -3, and you can check your answer. So these are pretty much one-step ones. These are pretty easy. For this one, you would get 5 and -5. For this one, you would get 5 and -5 again. This would get you 6 and -6. And you can see these are the opposite of each other, but that won't always be the case. Like, let's look at number 6. So you remember, you want to set up your two equations here. -4 plus 5x equals 16. And then one of them, all you're doing is changing the sign to a -16. That's all you're doing. Change sign. Change to negative. So this would get you add 4 to the other side. You get 20, divide by 5, x equals 4. Right? If you were to plug in a 4 here, you get 20 plus -4, which is 16. The absolute value of 16 is 16. For this one, you add the 4 to the other side, and you get 5x equals -12. Divide by 5, x is -12 over 5. If you were to plug this in, you would get the absolute value of -16, which is 16. You could even check. 5 times -12 over 5 gets you -12. -12 plus -4 is -16. The absolute value of -16 is 16. Okay. So for these ones, the absolute value sign is always alone, right? So the absolute value sign is already alone. So you just set up your two equations, but sometimes it won't always be alone on one side of the equation, like for number 11. So for these ones, the very first step is you want to get the absolute value alone on one side. So this gets you the absolute value of 5x. We're going to minus that 5 to the other side, which gets you 40. And then you would set up your two equations here. And then you would get your two answers. So remember, this one's a negative. So you get x is 8 and -8. So remember, for these, you get two answers. So a lot of students, sometimes they forget that. They only get one answer, and that's only half of the, half of the answer, right? It's not the correct answer if you're only getting 1 out of 2. So try not to do that. So for this one, I'm isolating the absolute value. I minus 8 to the other side. This means 3 times negative 8x. And remember, rules of solving equations, if something is being multiplied, to move it to the other side, you divide it. When something's being added, you subtract it, and vice versa. So I'm going to divide this 3 to the other side. That way it cancels out over here. I now get negative 8x is equal, an absolute value, is equal to 72 divided by 3. Which is 24. And you get x is 3 and negative 3. Those are my two answers. So for these, they're, it's pretty easy from here. Once you know how to solve equations, you're just making sure that you're correctly moving stuff to the other side. Remember, you want to isolate the absolute value. So for this one, you minus the 3 to the other side. There's a negative 1 here. You just don't see the 1. It's invisible. So you minus 3 to the other side first, which gets you 0. You now have negative 1 times the absolute value of 8x minus 6 equals 0. Divide both sides by negative 1. 0 divided by negative 1 is still 0. And so for this one, you're just going to get one answer since it's equal to 0. Because you can't do a negative 0. 0 is not positive or negative. So add 6 to the other side. You get 8x equals 6, divide by 8, and you get x is equal to 6 over 8. You would simplify your answer, divide the top and bottom by 2, and you would get 3/4. So try to practice these. Remember, get the absolute value alone. When you set up your problem, like here, I'm going to multiply the 8 to the other side. When you set up your two equations, be sure that you equal one of them to a negative. That way you can get your second answer. So that's important. That's why I'm repeating it. So be sure to practice these. I will give the answers for the homework once you complete it. Let me know if you have any questions.